Welcome, friends. James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com, with another edition of Solutions Watch. This one being recorded specifically at the end of March 2025, and hopefully you have had a chance to see my recent newsletter article on Japan is committing hara-kiri, as they might say in America. Japan is committing harakiri, but so is everybody else. And if you have read that article, or even if you haven't, you might have noticed that birth rates are declining around the world. In fact, within 25 years, the birth rate in every single region of the planet will be below the replacement rate, with the possible exception of Africa. And I say possible because everyone thinks that the replacement rate is 2.1 children per couple. But actually, that's a variable because it depends on a number of things like child mortality and other such things. So it is certainly possible that within 25 years, literally every region of the globe will be in under replacement rate and in birth decline, to the point where, yes, by the end of the century, we are going to have a shrinking human population. And I know the Malthusians in the crowd will cheer that on. We will talk about that directly in the future. But it was an interesting timing, coincidental timing, that on the day I was publishing that particular newsletter, our guest today was coming at this from the solutions side, as in, what can we do about the problem of the eugenicists and their mad depopulation push to poison the world and essentially, well, if not make people infertile, at least reduce their fertility? What can we do about that? That's an important question, and one that, thankfully, the answer does not have to be, well, we must go to modern medicine and we must go to a doctor and get invasive IVF treatments and other such tactics. No, there are natural, healthy ways to improve your body's fertility. So let's talk about this subject with today's guest, someone that I hope you will remember because he is a previous Solutions Watch guest. But here he is again, Gavin Mounsey. And his Substack, his work, will be linked in the show notes for your edification and pleasure. But Gavin, thank you very much for joining us again today.
Thanks for having me on, James.
Excellent. So, specifically, today we are talking about your recent post on fertility and reproductive health enhancing whole foods and naturally occurring compounds, which is a bit of a mouthful of a title, but still does not really do justice to the voluminous nature of this particular post. And as people start reading through, they might start to realize, oh, this is an incredibly thorough post, delivering exactly what you say there at the top. And in fact, this is the 26th post in the Stacking Functions in the Garden, Food Forest, and Medicine Cabinet, the Regenerative Way from Seed to Apothecary series. So, wow, what a series this is shaping up to be. At any rate, let's talk about that coincidental timing. As I'm writing about the declining birth rates, you are writing this incredibly voluminous and detailed guide on natural ways to improve fertility. What made you write this in the first place? Why were you interested in this subject? What prompted you to start putting this out now?
Well, it just the birth of the series itself, no pun intended, is me trying to support people in a decentralized way so that they can form a relationship with the earth, like I talked about in my first book, and learn how to use food to create not only food sovereignty but health sovereignty. Use food as medicine, because you know the big pharma industrial medical system is pretty dangerous a lot of the time, and even if they're well-meaning people within that system, a lot of the time their education is pretty lacking as far as nutrition. They mainly just get taught how to cover symptoms with synthetic substances. So I'm trying to kind of fill the gap as best I can by digging into the books and the research to give people the information so they can use food as medicine and then tie that into the earth so there's a reciprocal relationship going on. So I've been going through the different parts of the body in my series, and so far I've had like bone healing foods, brain healing foods, and eye healing foods and different things like that. I'm probably going to do a few more. And then eventually I got to the reproductive health, and like you, I noticed the declining birth rates. I own a copy of Countdown, and I just see people all around me that are my age and younger that are having birth issues, and they're going to these fertility clinics. Some of them, it's not necessarily a structural issue that can't be resolved without surgery. It's just they're not getting the proper nutrition, and they're full of toxins. So I thought I want to put together information that can help empower people to do everything they can outside of the realm of surgery to give their body the ability to produce, start a family. Because, if we want to start parallel societies, if we want to create a subculture that's going to be the alternative to the totalitarian system, starting a family has to be a part of that. We have to have a next generation to pass on the torch to. So, while some people might say we shouldn't have kids because of this or that, well, if you really want a future worth looking forward to, we have to have starting a family as part of that.
Excellent. Well, I couldn't agree more with that sentiment. And as I say, I just hope at the very least this conversation inspires people to click on that link that, again, will be in the show notes if you need it, to the Recipes for Reciprocity Substack, where you're detailing this, and just have a scroll through this article, and you will get an idea of just how much information is packed into here. So how do we even start addressing and talking about this? Well, I think there are a few different, obviously interrelated subjects to talk about here. And probably the biggest distinction is, of course, female fertility and male fertility. These are separate functioning systems that have their own things that will help in various ways for each member of the different sexes. So let's start in female fertility. What are some of the important and essential hormones and vitamins and other such things that are necessary for full female reproductive health?
Well, the nutrition side of things, there's a lot of crossover between male and females. So I covered those in the article to the point where you can pretty much do most of the foods and herbs for both male and female fertility, aside from a few of them which would be more about hormonal balance and promoting things like estrogen and helping with the female production. So in the herbal side of things, for female reproduction, for instance, there would be herbs listed like clover, and in ancient Chinese medicine, I think there was a peony root, which helps to balance the hormone production for females specifically, and that wouldn't be beneficial for males because then you'd be getting into lowering testosterone if you're increasing estrogen in males. And also foods that are high in those kind of mimicking estrogens, let's say unprocessed soybeans and a number of other foods. If you were eating copious amounts of those as a male, that might be problematic for your testosterone, but for females, that would be a beneficial food if it was fermented and not GMO and not full of glyphosate. But another one of the reasons why I wrote this article and many others like it is that I can't store all this information in my brain consciously to access it, on the spot. So I create these as sort of a reference point for the future, not only for other people, but for myself. So I can reference back to it and look at that when I'm trying to address certain health issues.
Yeah, I would say that would be the value of an article like this. It's almost like an encyclopedia or something, and you can scroll through and find the particular thing that you're looking for, rather than reading it as a narrative. But I did notice there was a lot of emphasis put on, for example, egg production and the essentially promotion of the various aspects of the female reproductive system. That, as you say, it's not like eating berries and other such things, which may be helpful for women in this particular regard, are going to be harmful to men. I mean, it's not a bad thing to be eating those types of ingredients anyway, but it's just nice to understand that there is scientific rigor that goes into this, and you cite a lot of different sources on this. All right, how about specifically male fertility related issues? What would be an example of something that would be specifically targeted at male, for example, sperm production?
Well, the big thing with male infertility is the toxins that are coming in and the various like radiation from devices that are damaging DNA. So that's going to harm the sperm production. So first, mitigating all those factors, which I did include a section. You inspired me to actually beef that up a bit. So down near the bottom of the article, there's going to be things to avoid. So that's the first step, because if you're supporting the body to produce all the building blocks it needs, but it's still being attacked by these external factors, you're fighting a losing battle. So you got to try to mitigate on one side while also supporting on the other side. But for male fertility, there's a few key nutrients. I think a lot of crossover with like the minerals and the vitamins. There's the vitamin D, the B vitamins, and specifically minerals like selenium, magnesium, and zinc I think were really essential for males' fertility specifically. And I remember reading a couple of studies, and you mentioned the studies. I appreciate that, because one of the reasons I put these together like I do is I do, like you, just copious amounts of reference points so that people don't have to trust my word for it. You know, take this information, go and look at the actual sources, look over it with your healthcare professional, whoever that is, and then you guys can formulate a plan and have that understanding, be confident about yourself. So yeah, for male fertility, there's some key nutrients like zinc, which is missing in the modern diet a lot of the time, and things like magnesium, which a lot of the food now from our big agriculture is depleted in a lot of these minerals because of the way we've kind of hammered the soil, whether through tilling or chemicals. So if you're buying things from the store versus getting it either organically or regeneratively grown, sometimes these things don't contain the minerals in it anymore. So that's important to think about. And one of the reasons why I thought about my first book, first starting with nurturing the soil, because otherwise you're not actually going to get the nutrition out of your food that you think you would.
As you say, there's a lot of crossover between male and female fertility, that things that will just generally be good for systems. What are some of the general points that you might give to couples that are looking to increase fertility that might be helpful for both the man and the woman?
Well, there's basically like the key nutrients that I would go into, like the omega fatty acids are essential. You need to get a good spectrum of proteins, whether that's from animal-based proteins or plant-based proteins. And in the context of males, you want to keep in mind the phytoestrogens, the mimicking estrogen compounds that are in some foods. You wouldn't want to eat a copious amount of those. But basically getting a good spectrum of your protein range, a good mineral range. I like to go to things like spirulina and chlorella, which have a really good mineral spectrum in them, and they're also really helpful for detox simultaneously. So those things are great for males and females because you're getting a good spectrum of the vitamins and minerals you need, while also helping your body get out some of those nasty EDTs and other things, or EDCs, sorry. And then you'd want to look into getting antioxidants, especially because that's important for male and female, protecting the DNA. So basically, look at your rainbow of color and find a food in each one of those spectrums that's going to provide the antioxidants in there. The deep green, chlorophyll-rich leafy greens, your antioxidant-rich purple and red and pink stuff, your anthocyanin-rich stuff, your carotenoids, your orange stuff, and all of these are going to provide part of the spectrum that you need to support both female and male fertility. And they also help with detox, so it's a stacking functions like the name of the article implies.
Yes. Well, you mentioned detoxification and you name drop EDC. Wow. A nice acronym that people may or may not be familiar with. Again, if they've read my work, they'll hopefully be familiar with that by now. But anyway, endocrine-disrupting chemical, which includes a lot of things that may be in your daily life that you may not even know. Let's talk a little bit about the EDCs, what they are, how people can identify and avoid them, and how people who are concerned about the effects that these have been having on their reproductive system can do to detox from the toxic poisons that they've been subjected to.
Yeah, you did a great job in your article listing the sources of them. They definitely are in the food and even in the air and the water now because of how much chemicals they've been pumping out, especially in agriculture, like glyphosate, for instance, is an endocrine disruptor. So first, sourcing out the ways that those are in your home, which I listed in my article. Minimizing plastic reusable containers because those are leaking in endocrine disruptors into your water and various things you might cook in and on your body. If it's clothing, those are going through your skin. And then there's personal care products. There's like deodorants and shampoos and stuff like that. You need to take a look at the list of those because a lot of those contain these endocrine disruptors too. And so that's like a slow damage to your fertility and all the rest of your health as well. And then there's like aluminum, which I don't know if it's considered an endocrine disruptor, but it is prolific in the health products like deodorant, for instance, and shampoos and in cookware, and it also damages fertility. So watching out for those things first in the house, and then when you get your food outside, making sure that you're getting it from a clean source, that it's not conventionally genetically modified grown food because those pesticides are full of those problematic compounds. And then just taking a look at your food source and your water source especially too, because filtering the water that's coming into your house is another way you can cut off those EDCs before they get into your body.
There are so many various vectors that people, I think, should at least be aware of for these various EDCs and where they come from. And as you say, certainly in a lot of plastics and food lining, food container lining, etc. For some reason or other, BPA and other such things have just found their way into all of these household products. Luckily, for example, bisphenol A, for some reason, in the past decade or two, people have become aware of BPA and that BPA-free labels and other such things have appeared on products. But maybe not enough. As you say, you've read Countdown, so you are well aware of the voluminous scientific study of this subject and the plummeting sperm rates across the world. But in addition to those types of chemical toxins, I am interested to see you also addressed psychological toxins that are invading people's minds and perhaps preventing them from being fertile. Talk about the concept of psychological toxins and why you included that in this.
Yeah, well, another one that you kind of inspired me to think of. I mean, I had already been thinking about how the anti-human propaganda of people being afraid to have children because they think humans are like a disease on the planet. That's kind of a psychological virus that's changing people's perspectives. Like you said, the most insidious part of this whole depopulation agenda is convincing people to depopulate themselves. So there's other variables I thought about that are also influencing people's either family dynamics or their willingness and interest in having children. I characterize those as psychological toxins. So I put a little section in the article there, and I listed a few that I could think of. I'm sure there's more. But one of the main ones that came up, because I was looking at your excellent post on the Amazonian tribe gets Starlink internet, and I came across that part that described pornography as a neurological weapon. And I thought about that in the context of relationships and families, and how there's so many people that when they get hooked into this stimulus, it's really damaging their ability to start a family. So I did a little write-up on there, and there actually turns out that there's some studies on the biological effects as well, for both males and females, that it's going to damage the biological function of fertility. But the psychological variable is that, people that are into that stimulus, they're less likely to have a stable relationship, a healthy relationship that's going to result in a marriage. And as you pointed out in your article, marriage is a huge factor for women being willing to and wanting to have children. So that is a trickle-down effect, that once you start that domino of people being hooked into that stimulus, they're a lot less likely later in life to have a family. And the way that they're kind of grooming kids with these social medias like TikTok, and they're introducing them to this kind of content, it seems like a kind of intentional thing in that context where it's crippling people's ability to have a healthy relationship and a family. So I thought that's kind of a psychological toxin that's been introduced into the cultural framework that is doing that. And then aside from that, the anti-human misanthropic propaganda that conditions people to see humans as a cancer on the earth, that's creating like guilt and fear in people about starting a family, like I shouldn't because we're such a burden. And yeah, it's an artificially maintained form of self-loathing. It's self-destructive, and it's kind of an ultra slow motion form of multi-generational suicide, because people are less likely to want to have kids, and eventually, their cultures and their demographic is going down to zero. And then on the other side of things, I was watching an interview of yours that you did with Derek Burrows, and he was talking about how there's kind of, in some circles, when they figure out that the globalists are using all this greenwashing and trying to get people that care about nature to go on their side, people go on the opposite side and they go into this anti-nature kind of mentality, where they think anything that has to do with caring for the forests or the waters or anything to do with Earth is globalist related, and so they become kind of anti-nature. And I thought that in itself too is a kind of a psychological toxin, because in the end, when you start to see everything other than humans as just less than, and the earth as just something to be exploited, the end result of that is that you're going to damage the very ecosystems and the water and the food and everything that's helping your fertility in the first place. So down the line, you're feeding into a mentality and systems that are also going to damage your fertility biologically, and then, in other ways down the line. So I cover that too in there. And then lastly, but not leastly, statism. Statism is the religion that I would say is one of the most damaging psychological toxins for fertility, because the statist systems themselves, we know they've done eugenics operations where they're intentionally targeting certain demographics and trying to physically limit their ability to reproduce. But more than that, the statist systems themselves indoctrinate people into these other belief systems, whether it's the anti-human one, like in Canada. I'm sure that if you go look on the government, they're all saying there's too many humans and we got to do sustainable development and decrease the population. Or if it's more on the industrialist side of things, like let's say Trump and Musk are doing, where they're like, let's chop it all down and extract it all. And that also is, these are statist promoted mentalities that are eventually going to impact fertility and people's ability to access clean water and food. So yeah, the statist belief system and those other ones are psychological toxins that are injected into culture, and that over time are a kind of a slow motion decrease in fertility and the viability of cultures.
Well, there is no doubt that there is a huge psychological factor that is going on here. Yes, there are many different things that are happening here, but one of them is that psychological assault. And I have a lot to say about all of the topics that you're talking about there. So, in fact, in a sense, as I'm thinking about it, you're connecting the dot that I was thinking about the other day. At the base of the technocratic mindset that is obviously the flavor of eugenicism that's taking place in the 21st century is the idea that, going back perhaps to Heidegger, that the earth is, and all natural resources are standing reserve to be transformed into something useful for human productivity or something along those lines. And when we start to see the world as nothing other than resources that we can use to our advantage, then we start to literally shape our entire society around that. And that, I think, to me, is the basis of the technocratic mindset. But it's also the same mindset as the people who think of the earth as less than whatever, it's unimportant, it's only there for the resources of humanity. I think there is obviously a parallel there, and I think I want to draw that out in future work. But I think also it is incredibly important to join head on the battle against the Malthusian mentality, which, for me, it's always fascinating that when I write about this subject or talk about the declining birth rates and other such things, to see the demonic energy of some people who get extremely agitated about this. And why do you care so much about humanity? Why do you want more people on this planet? People are terrible. But I'm against the eugenicists and the elitists and everything. It's just I believe everything they believe, and I hate humans too. It's a weird reaction. First of all, have you encountered that when you try to bring this information to people in your circles? And if so, how do you counter that?
Yeah, for sure. It's prolific. It's a kind of thing that's been infiltrated into people's minds, especially people that care about the earth, because of course the environmental, bright green environmentalism and the sustainable development thing are all promoting that. So people have been inculcated into this belief system that humans are inevitably an imposition on the earth. So when people come to me and they're saying these concerns about that, about human population, and saying that we should actively lower the population or shouldn't try to increase it, basically what I say is, like, if you're going to worry about increasing human fertility, look at how other cultures in the past have also increased the fertility of the land where they live while living. So there's examples, plenty of them all over the world, where people, even in growing populations, their culture had a specific ethos and a specific mentality with regards to nature, so that while they were also feeding themselves, they were feeding the earth. So if you're guilty and you're feeling bad about starting a family, increase your fertility while increasing the fertility of the earth where you live. And then your conscience can be clear, because there's clear examples. Like, I have a couple of them I scribbled down so I wouldn't forget. Like if you look in the Amazon rainforest, the Terra Preta, there was cultures there in the Amazon that over many, many generations, the way that they produced their soil, the way that they got rid of their waste, was to create these permanently enriched soil structures that they call Terra Preta, the black earth. And so their population was thriving, it was stable, and yet they were also building the biodiversity and the support of the forest around them. And we can see the results of that now with the amazing soil that's there. So that's one example. And then, of course, there's ancient food forests all over the globe. There's some that are in South America. There's some here in North America, aka Turtle Island. There's one in Morocco. I suspect there was some in ancient Ireland, which I covered in a post recently. So there's ways that humans can live and increase their resilience and their cultures thriving that also increases nature thriving. So that's my approach, is to reframe this idea of humans as a disease and see that there's viable historical examples that we can build on. You don't have to emulate them and replicate them exactly, because there's certain contexts that aren't relevant anymore here. But you can take pieces that work, you can puzzle them together, and we can create a path forward where we're also enhancing the biodiversity of the earth while building families and building sustainable cultures. Yes. And then another example I had here was for people on the coast. There's examples of, because the ocean's being so aggressively pillaged, people say, well, what about the ocean? Well, there's regenerative aquaculture and mariculture. So some cultures actually built like estuaries in the tidal zones, and they increase the biodiversity through farming oysters, let's say, or clams or seaweed, creating an ecosystem for other beings while feeding themselves. So there's a lot of examples that we can build on, and that's my approach, is that humans can be a solution. The human hands that we've been conditioned to see as damaging can also be healing. We just need to reframe, and use our gifts for the good of the planet and ourselves as well.
I couldn't agree more. And now that I think about it, I think there is a kind of weird two sides of the same coin thing that's happening between people who are all in favor of environmental destruction, whatever it takes, just resources for humans, and the people who think, oh, humans are a cancer on the planet. They both kind of see humans as unnatural, as not part of the natural world in a way. Whereas, no, I think humans are part of this world. And yes, I agree. I think more humans finding ways to live in balance with nature is to the good. And I think it can be done. And I'm glad to see that at least some people are fighting through and breaking through that conditioning that I think we've all been subjected to, and that's very easy and lazy for the misanthropes and learned psychopaths out there to adopt. Having said that, if people are interested in increasing fertility, starting a family, here's an entire encyclopedia of information for you to start browsing through, and I hope people will do that. Once again, the name of this particular post is Fertility and Reproductive Health Enhancing Whole Foods and Naturally Occurring Compounds. And as I say, 26th post in the Stacking Functions in the Garden, Food Forest, and Medicine Cabinet. Can you tell us about some of the other 25 posts and what people might find there?
For sure. And just one more thing on the Malthusian variable is people, that have adopted this mentality, we need to lower the population. At its extreme, the Georgia Guidestones as an example, even if we were to reduce our numbers of humans down to Georgia Guidestones numbers, in the age of robotics and automation, I would say that it's important to think that people could actually be living in their smart cities and bunkers while also destroying the earth, even with tiny amounts of numbers. So it's not so much a matter of the amount of humans, but rather the humans' choices that we're making, the ethos that are driving our culture. So population isn't so much as whether we're using our gifts for good or not. But the series. So I started with plants that I know well and trees that I know well and some fungi that I know well, teaching people how to cultivate them, how to identify them in the forest and propagate them so that they're identifying abundance that's already around us and then building on it, so they're not just extracting. So I covered a number of different species that are great for either residential gardening and regenerative gardening or for food forest design. And then from there I built on these different dietary lists that are helping maintain optimal human health. So I think I started with one because I had a couple friends that were really severely impacted by those mRNA injections. So I started with spike protein detox and cardio-regenerative foods. And so I provided some ways that nature can help us to heal that aspect, whether they're dealing with what I just mentioned or they just want to maintain optimal heart health. And then I went on to the osteoprotective and osteoregenerative, so we can maintain optimal bone health. And then also the eye health and the radioprotective foods, so protecting our bodies from radiation, whether that's ionizing radiation like you guys would have to deal with in Japan with all the mess they're creating there, or it's the non-ionizing radiation from these devices, the artificial EMFs. So I'm trying to give people a framework where they can tie their resilience right into the ground where they live, recognize the abundance all around them, and then let that resilience go right into their bodies to make them healthy so they can apply their unique gifts where they are and make their communities resilient, build those parallel societies you talk about. And we can resist while doing it joyfully and healthily.
Excellent. Well, as we talked about in your previous appearance on Solutions Watch, you also have a book on recipes for reciprocity. Tell people about that book and how they can get a copy.
Yeah, Recipes for Reciprocity is my first book. So it was, as I said in the other Solutions Watch, it was born of my want to connect on people to the earth in a reciprocal way while also being creative in the kitchen. And so that book I have on my website, recipesforreciprocity.com. And you can get physical copies as well as digital copies. And I like to slip in little heirloom seeds in with the book, so you'll often find when you open it up, you've got some medicinal herb seeds or some vegetable seeds in there to get you going to grow the ingredients for the recipes in the book, or just to make some great tea. And that book is my starting point. I do touch on food forest design in there a little bit, and then I'm building on that for my next book, which is going to be more scalable either from a residential scale or a community scale to build resilient multi-generational food systems. So the food system that would support a parallel society and that is able to be scaled as you need it, while also regenerating and enhancing biodiversity and nature around us.
Excellent stuff. All right, I'm looking forward to that next book, as I imagine a lot of people are. So in the meantime, recipesforreciprocity.com, gavinmounsey.substack.com. All of the links to everything that we've mentioned today will be in the show notes. Gavin Mounsey, thank you again for your time and for doing this incredibly laborious and detailed work.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it.